All right. Welcome to the last week that we're going to be talking about numbers. And I am excited for that news. This book has been fun, but I'm excited because I really love Deuteronomy. And so I'm excited to get into Deuteronomy as a recap of the law and all of that. But Numbers has been a book that starts with the people about to go into the land and then their rebellion and then 40 years wandering in the wilderness. And that 40 years is summed up with just a couple of chapters. And so today, in the last section, we're going to actually see Moses giving some instruction to, not instruction, Moses is instructed by the Lord to write down, zipping up my coat because the microphone keeps moving around, to write down their journeys through the wilderness. And the passages like this can seem like, as we read through the Bible, like, why is this here? It's so boring. But for the people who lived it, this was a travel log, and every stage of the journey for them was meaningful. It was significant. And if you think about the people who are turning 45 as they are entering into the promised land, they probably have a really good memory of all of these different stages and the ways the Lord has provided for them. And so so while these kinds of passages seem boring to us, we're so far removed from the context that it's hard to keep it all straight. And that's so I hope, as we've been walking through the books of the law so far, starting with Exodus, now finishing up Numbers, that we would remember some of these places. And as we walk through the passage, there's some places that are lost to history. We don't know where they really are. So I'm not going to make comments about every single piece along this journey in chapter 33, but we'll pause just a couple times and talk about some of the things. So let's jump in. Chapter 33, verse 1. Here are the stages in the journey of the Israelites when they came out of Egypt by divisions under the leadership of Moses and Aaron. At the Lord's command, Moses recorded the stages in their journey. This is their journey by stages. The Israelites set out from Ramses on the 15th day of the first month, the day after the Passover. They marched out defiantly in full view of all the Egyptians, who were burying all their firstborn, whom the Lord had struck down among them, for the Lord had brought judgment on their gods. So pause there. Remember the Exodus event, the 10 plagues, all of them were not just miracles for miracles' sake, but all of the plagues were the Lord directly contradicting and confronting the idolatry of the Egyptian people. And from the Nile River, which they worshipped, turning to blood, all the way to the death of the firstborn, all of these different plagues had an important effect. And so with even Pharaoh, who was believed to be divine, to be a god among the people, for his firstborn to be struck dead was an indicator that all the gods of Egypt are nothing, but the Lord God is more powerful than any of them. And so here in this retelling of these events, that Moses pauses here and makes this note, like, we left defiantly, we left knowing that, we are on God's team and he is victorious. And the little note that the Egyptians were watching them leave as they were burying their firstborns. This is the kind of note that they could just say, we left Ramses on the 15th day of the month, but no, he's intentionally reminding the people, because most of the people who are hearing this from Moses weren't there. Most of them were not alive. And so these stories that were told over and over again were intended to help the people remember these things. And so this is just one of those reminders of how the story was passed on. And then the Israelites left Ramses and camped at Sukkot, and they left Sukkot and camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. They left Etham, turned back to Pi-ha-Hiroth to the east of Baal-Zephon and camped near Migdol. They left Pi-ha-Hiroth and passed through the sea into the desert. And when they had traveled for the 3 days in the desert of Etham, they camped at Marah. So as you read through here, Sukkot is also the word for tabernacles, or booths, I should say. So the Feast of Tabernacles, they're living in tents, and Sukkot means tents. And so they camped at a place called Tents, which is interesting. But then as it goes on, they passed through the sea into the desert. They didn't just walk to the next stop. There's a note here from Moses. Here's another one of the Lord's miracles. They passed through the sea into the desert. And then when they get to Marah, we remember that there was some bitterness. As we are thinking through the story, the water there was bitter, and the Lord purified the water, and so they could drink it. They left Marah and went to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. They left Elim and camped by the Red Sea. They left the Red Sea and camped in the desert of Sin. They left the desert of Sin and camped at Dafka. They left Dafka and camped at Alish. They left Alish and camped at Rephidim, where there was no water for the people to drink. And if we remember that story, there is another miracle story. There was no water for the people to drink, but they struck the rock and their water came out of the rock. They left Rephidim and camped in the desert of Sinai. And so as they are moving from, that's one section of the major travel, moving from Egypt to Sinai. And at Sinai, they were there for about 2 years. They were receiving the law from Moses. They heard God speak on the mountain, and they were overwhelmed. They had instructions on how to build the tabernacle and the articles of the tabernacle. And so they did all of that while they were at Sinai. So that's a major breaking point in the story here, where there's a pause. The next section then is leaving Sinai. They left the desert of Sinai and camped at Kibrot Hata'ava. They left Kibrot Hata'ava and camped at Hatzerot. They left Hatzerot and camped at Ritma. They left Ritma and camped near Ramon Perez. They left Ramon Perez and camped near Libnah. They left Libnah and camped near Rissa. They left Rissa and camped at Kehelatah. They left Kehelatah and camped at Mount Sephir. They left Mount Sephir and camped at Haradah. They left Haradah and camped at Mechalot. They left Mechalot and camped at Tahat. They left Tahat and camped at Terah. They left Terah and camped at Miktah. They left Miktah and camped at Hashamonah. They left Hashamonah and camped at Moserot. They left Moserot and camped at Bene Ja'akan. They left Bene Ja'akan and camped at Hor Higdad. They left Hor Higdad and camped at Jotbatah. They left Jotbatah and camped at Abronah. They left Abronah and camped at Etzion Geber. They left Etzion Geber and camped at Kadesh in the desert of Zin. Now, that's the path essentially from Sinai up to the place where they almost entered into the land. And they were, as you remember, they failed to trust the Lord to go into the land, and they were then turned around for 40 years, and they were in the wilderness. And so then picks up at verse 37, they left Kadesh and camped at Mount Hor on the border of Edom. So now they're turning their way back up. At the Lord's command, Aaron the priest went up to Mount Hor, where he died on the first day of the 5th month of the 40th year after the Israelites came out of Egypt. Aaron was 123 years old when he died on Mount Hor. The Canaanite king of Arad lived in the Negev of Canaan, heard that the Israelites were coming. They left Mount Hor and camped at Zalmonah. They left Zalmonah and camped at Punan. They left Punan and camped at Obat. They left Obat and camped at Aye Abarim on the border of Moab. They left Aye Abarim and camped at Dibon Gad. They left Dibon Gad and camped at Almon Diblatayim. They left Almon Diblatayim and camped in the mountains of Abarim near Nebo. They left the mountains of Abarim and camped in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. There on the plains of Moab, they camped along the Jordan from Bet Jeshemot to Abel Shittim. So it's a lot of different places, but all of these different stops were part of the journey to the land that God had promised. And I have a little map I'll share with you just so you can see it. So this is the map here. And so they went down to the Red Sea, and then there's a couple different possible ways that they could have traveled to get to Kadesh Barnea. The traditional route is going down this way, all the way down, but then there's another person suggested that they just cut across there. Regardless, all of these different place names are and that are listed here. There's some that are on this map, but this is kind of the area. And as they came up from leaving Mount Hor, they came back up around into the land, coming up to where it says on the top there, Jericho. Now, the Dead Sea is connected to the Jordan and the Sea of Galilee, and so they're camped right across the river from Jericho as Moses is writing this. And this is really the last thing that Moses is saying to the people. He's like writing, he's finishing up his writing, and so he wants to give them this travel log of sorts as a way to help keep them focused on what God has done and to remain faithful to the Lord as they are walking with him in all these different events that have happened, his faithfulness in battle, the miracles of provision. Moses is writing this because the Lord wants the people to see his goodness in all these things. So let's pick up in verse 50, because this is where they are right now. On the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho, the Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into Canaan, drive out all the inhabitants of the land before you. Destroy all their carved images and their cast idols and demolish their high places. Take possession of the land and settle in it, for I have given you the land to possess. Distribute the land by lot according to your clans. To a larger group, give a larger inheritance, and a smaller group, give a smaller one. Whatever falls to them by lot will be theirs. Distribute it according to your ancestral tribes. But if you do not drive out all the inhabitants of the land, those you allow to remain will become barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides. They will give you trouble in the land where you live, and then I will do to you what I plan to do to them." So as they are coming into the land, they're going to divide up the territory. And so this is now a transition point. We've done the numbers, we've done the census to see how big the different tribes are. And we also know from last week that 2.5 tribes are going to stay on the east side of the Jordan River. And so they're not going to be a part of the inheritance in the land of Canaan proper. And so they're going to divide up the land based on the size of the groups of the tribes, and then also by lot for each family in those territories to create parcels for households. And this is going to be important for the rest of this book. There's going to be some different situations where we need to make sure that the inheritance is tied to the families. And so we're going to come back to Zelophehad's daughters, which we talked about, I think 2 weeks ago. And so that's going to be a part of this whole process. Now, the Lord also gives the people the direct command to drive out all of the Canaanites that are there because of their idolatry. Their wicked pagan practices are detestable to the Lord, and he does not want the people of the land to remain in Canaan because they are a pollution. Their practices are a pollution to God's people. And so it's very important that they do not allow the Canaanites to stay there. However, as we read through the rest of the Old Testament, they did not drive out all of the Canaanites. They didn't faithfully carry this out. And we will see again and again and again throughout the Old Testament that the people of Israel did experience the barbs that the Lord was talking about in this section, that they were a problem for them. So, all right, I'm going to go to chapter 34. And while I'm reading chapter 34, I'm going to share this map of the land because it's the territory of Canaan. So I'm going to share my screen again. And it's going to be this guy here, share. All right, so this is the map of Canaan. So 34 verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, command the Israelites and say to them, when you enter Canaan, the land that will be allotted to you as an inheritance is to have these boundaries. Your southern side, which is down here by Hatzar Adar, your southern side will include some of the desert of Zin along the border of Edom. Your southern boundary will start in the east from the southern end of the Dead Sea, cross the Scorpion Pass. Cross the Scorpion Pass. I lost my spot. Continue on to Zin and go south to Kadesh Barnea. Then it will go to Hatzar Adar over to Asmon, where it will join the Wadi of Egypt and end at the Mediterranean Sea. Your western boundary will be the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, and in the Hebrew is actually the Great Sea. This will be your boundary on the west side. For your northern boundary, run a line from the Mediterranean Sea to Mount Hor, and from Mount Hor to Lebo Hamat. Then the boundary will go to Zedad, continue to Zifron at the end of Hatzar Enan. This will be the boundary on the north. For your eastern boundary, run a line from Hatzar Enan to Shepham. The boundary will go down from Shepham to Riblah on the east side of Ain and continue along the slopes east of the Sea of Galilee. Then the boundary will go down along the Jordan and end at this Dead Sea. This will be your land with its boundaries on every side. Moses commanded the Israelites, assign this land by lot as an inheritance. The Lord has ordered that it be given to 9.5 tribes because the families of the tribes of Reuben, the tribes of Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh had received their inheritance. Has received their inheritance. These 2.5 tribes have received their inheritance east of the Jordan, across from Jericho, toward the sunrise. All right, so here we have this map, and you can see the different boundaries that are given, and some of these places are kind of estimated of where they would be, but this map is the Lord's provision of the territory for the people of Israel. The people of Israel, the nation of Israel, never fully occupied this much territory, but the land of Canaan was referred to this way by the Egyptian empire in their maps. Like, it was very similar boundaries of Canaan. And so it is a realistic picture of what Canaan is, but the people never fully expanded out and ruled this whole area. And so that's just so you see the map. This is what we're talking about. The Mediterranean is over here, on the west, and all these different places. And one of the challenges was, as you go farther to the north and to the west, you've got the Philistines over here that were really held on to the land. But then you've got Moab, Edom, Midianites, all of these different tribes over here that are going to be a problem for the people of Israel as well. And so that's the territory overall that we are looking at. All right, verse 16. Verse 16 of chapter 34. The Lord said to Moses, these are the names of the men who are to assign the land for you as your inheritance: Eleazar the priest and Joshua son of Nun, and appoint one leader from each tribe to help assign the land. These are their names: Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the tribe of Judah. Shemuel, son of Ammihud, of the tribe of Simeon. Eladad, son of Kislon, from the tribe of Benjamin. Buki, son of Jogli, the leader from the tribe of Dan. Hanael, son of Ephod, the leader from the tribe of Manasseh, son of Joseph. Kemuel, son of Shiftan, the leader from the tribe of Ephraim, son of Joseph. Elizaphan, son of Parnak, from the tribe of Zebulun. Paltiel, son of Adzon, the leader from the tribe of Issachar. Ahud, son of Shelomai, the leader from the tribe of Asher. Pedahel, son of Ammihud, the leader from the tribe of Naphtali. These are the men the Lord commanded to assign the inheritance to the Israelites in the land of Canaan. One of the interesting things in this whole process is that the Lord is giving very clear instructions on how to go into the land. We've met leaders from other tribes before, but in this list, Caleb is the only leader from a tribe that we have met before. And it makes sense because a whole generation has died in the wilderness. And so these are now new leaders. These are new people who are stepping into leadership. And so in accordance with the boundary lines that the Lord is going to give to the people, the size of the tribes, all of these different elements, and then family to family, they're going to cast lots to determine who gets which part of the land. And so these leaders are all a part of this process, but it is still guided by Joshua, who is going to take over leadership after Moses dies, and Eleazar, the priest, who is going to lead in the religious and the cultural worship that the people are going to be engaged in. And so the casting of lots is part of letting the Lord determine where these different boundaries fall. One of the interesting things when we think about even the psalm that we read on Sunday talks about it was Psalm 16, I believe, but it talks about how our inheritance comes from the Lord, and the boundary lines have fallen in good places for me. That's partly talking about these family inheritances, that they are like the Lord is your inheritance. That yes, the land is God, it belongs to the Lord, and so He grants us as the people of Israel the opportunity to live in these places. And so that inheritance that we receive from the Lord is good, and the lots, the boundary lines that were drawn up for us, like those are good. And so these kinds of decisions that they're going to make with determining who goes where, like it's part of the cultural fabric and the identity of the people of Israel. It's like, where is your inheritance? How has the Lord determined to bless you in these different lands per tribe? So, and the different leaders, they're all new, like I said, but these leaders would probably have risen up over time. They didn't have like individual tribal kings, like to like inheritance wise. So I don't know if they cast lots for who the leaders are. Somehow these people were appointed by the Lord. We don't know if it was the Lord saying that guy right now, or as to say like, these are the leaders and that are serving as leaders, and I am acknowledging their gifting. That's not spelled out here. All right, chapter 35. On the plains of Moab by the Jordan River, across from Jericho, the Lord said to Moses, command the Israelites to give the Levites towns to live in from the inheritance the Israelites will possess, and give them pasture lands around the towns. Then they will have towns to live in and pasture lands for the cattle they own and all the other animals. The pasture lands around the towns that you give the Levites will extend 1,000 cubits from the town wall. Outside the town, measure 2,000 cubits on the east side, 2,000 cubits on the south side, 2,000 on the west side, and 2,000 on the north, with the town in the center. They will have this area as pasture land for the towns. And so as the people are going to go in and do the battles and take the towns. Some of the towns are going to be destroyed completely, like Jericho, but a lot of the towns that are already there, the people of Israel are going to move into. And so some of the towns that the Levites are going to move into may have already existed. Some of the towns the Levites are going to build, they will start building from scratch. But it is important now, before the people go into the land, the Lord is giving these instructions to say, like, you have to set aside these different towns among the people of all the tribes to give to the Levites. And so out of all of these different towns, they are also going to have some specific numbers of towns that are set aside even more. So the Levites being scattered throughout the region is so that there are people who are representative of the Lord as servants of the temple and the sacrificial system. Like these Levites, they're they're there to be a blessing to the people, scattered among the people, not all just in Jerusalem as a religious center, but scattered throughout the region. And the way they describe the towns here are also, the Levites don't have large tracts of land, but they are going to be responsible for livestock, because that's also part of the tabernacle system. And so the Levites will have livestock to care for in all of their possessions. And so the town in the middle, and then all of the pasture land around, like that's not going to be given to one particular family. Like that's shared pasture land all around the town, so that they can continue to care for their flocks and herds. And so it's about for all of the land that they give, I found this interesting. It's about 15 square miles total for all of the Levites' towns and pasture land, which is about 0.1% of the land of all of Canaan, is how much the Levites are actually given. And so they would not be self-sufficient, is why, like when you look at how small of a percentage of the land they have, they're not completely self-sufficient. Even though they have pasture land, they still are going to be dependent upon the other tribes and for agriculture and regular produce, those kinds of things. The other tribes are going to give to the Levites to help sustain them. So let's keep going. Verse 6. 6 of the towns you give the Levites will be cities of refuge, to which a person who has killed someone may flee. In addition, give them 42 other towns, so 48 towns total. In all, you must give the Levites 48 towns, so that says right there, together with their pasture lands. The towns you give the Levites from the land of the Israelites possess are to be given in proportion to the inheritance of each tribe. Take many towns from a tribe that has many, but few from one that has few. Then the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into Canaan, select some towns to be cities of refuge, to which a person who has killed someone accidentally may flee. They will be places of refuge from the avenger, so that anyone accused of murder may not die before they stand trial before the assembly. These 6 towns you give will be your cities of refuge. Give 3 on this side of the Jordan and 3 in Canaan as cities of refuge. These 6 towns will be places of refuge for Israelites and for foreigners residing among them, so that anyone who has killed another accidentally can flee there. If anyone strikes someone with a fatal blow with an iron object, that person is a murderer. The murderer is to be put to death. Or if anyone is holding a stone and strikes someone a fatal blow with it, that person is a murderer. The murderer is to be put to death. Or if anyone holding a wooden object and strikes someone a fatal blow with it, that person is a murderer. The murderer is put to death. The avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death. When the avenger comes upon the murderer, the avenger shall put the murderer to death. If anyone with malice aforethought shoves another person or throws something at them intentionally so that they die, or out of enmity, one person hits another with their fist so that the other dies, that person is to be put to death. That person is a murderer. The avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death when they meet. Let's pause there, because these cities of refuge are intended to be sanctuaries for people who didn't mean to kill somebody, like that accident. But then the Lord gives some clarification here, like how would you know, or how can you tell if this was an accident? Well, if they hit somebody with a weapon, that wasn't an accident. If they hit somebody as they're quarreling and they have a rock in their hand and they hit them because they're angry, that's not an accident either. And so if they have a grudge, a longstanding grudge between two families, and somebody from one family kills another family, that's not an accident. That was something that was premeditated or born from enmity. And so the trial is essentially like, did this person do this? Do we know that they had a motivation? Do they, like, they will do that kind of trial, and then the avenger is tasked to put that person to death. And the avenger is a family member who a family member of the person who was killed. And it's interesting because they don't have a police class in Israel. They don't have a penal system of penalties. The determination, like, they would probably bring this person who killed somebody else to the leader who we just read about, these different tribal leaders, to do the trial, and then the tribal leader would probably say this person is guilty. And then the execution is not something that is done from a distance, from an anonymous source. It's a family member who is maybe the next in the line of hierarchy, or above this person in the hierarchy, closest to them, who would then be responsible to exact justice, which is a very different system than ours. And it's not like a vigilante who is just like taking care of business in their own strength. It is a person who is only going to bring justice against this one person. Now, the next section talks about, but what if it wasn't on purpose? So in verse 22, but if without enmity, someone suddenly pushes another or throws something at them unintentionally, or without seeing them, drops on them a stone heavy enough to kill them, and they die. Then, since that other person was not an enemy and no harm was intended, the assembly must judge between the accused and the avenger of blood according to these regulations. The assembly must protect the one accused of murder from the avenger of blood and send the accused back to the city of refuge to which they fled. The accused must stay there until the death of the high priest who was anointed with holy oil. But if the accused ever goes outside the limits of the city of refuge to which they fled, and the avenger of blood finds them outside the city, the avenger of blood may kill the accused without being guilty of murder. The accused must stay in the city of refuge until the death of a high priest. Only after the death of the high priest may they return to their own property. This is to have the force of law for you throughout the generations to come, wherever you live. Anyone who kills a person is to be put to death as a murderer only on the testimony of witnesses, but no one is to be put to death on the testimony of only one witness. Do not accept a ransom for the life of a murderer who deserves to die. They are to be put to death. Do not accept a ransom for anyone who has fled to a city of refuge, and so allow them to go back and live on their own land before the death of the high priest. Do not pollute the land where you are. Bloodshed pollutes the land, and atonement cannot be made for the land on which blood has been shed, except by the blood of the one who shed it. Do not defile the land where you live and where I dwell, for I, the Lord, dwell among the Israelites. So if somebody didn't intend to kill somebody, so maybe they're working in the forest, they're cutting down trees, and the axe head breaks, and it breaks off, and it flies, like, as they hit it, the momentum off the tree knocks the axe head over behind them, and they kill somebody. It was an accident. Now, that's still death. That is still killing somebody. But the person who accidentally killed somebody can go to one of the 6 cities of refuge and await a trial. But even in this, as you read through this, the person who killed somebody, even if they are found innocent, it's not like they're just washed away. They still have to wait for the death of the high priest. The avenger of blood can't come into that town and kill them in the town. But if they ever find the person outside of that town, they can kill them, because that person is taking their life into their own hands, essentially, to leave the sanctuary city. But the only time that the exile of sorts into the sanctuary cities, the cities of refuge, is when the high priest dies. And that the high priest exists to provide atonement for the people of Israel. And so their death is the final substitution or final atonement for somebody who may have accidentally killed somebody. And so when the high priest dies, then they can come back into their hometown. But until that happens, they live in the sanctuary city. And it's interesting, though, to think, like, when we look at the book of Hebrews, Jesus is compared to all these different elements of the Jewish law, and one of them is Jesus is a greater high priest. And the high priest, he was the representative for the people before God. And Jesus, the high priest, had to go into the tabernacle, into the Holy of Holies, with the blood of a sacrifice, but Jesus goes in as the sacrifice and as the priest, and he completes these different sacrifices and fulfills these different sacrifices. One of the interesting things as well in the book of Hebrews, when he's talking about the people of the Jewish people who have come to faith, is like, we are seeking refuge in the Lord. And so the Jewish people reading the book of Hebrews, this would have been like all kinds of links in their minds to say, oh, so Jesus is our refuge. Jesus is our sanctuary. He's our protection. And now we have this perfect sacrifice, this perfect substitute, and a high priest who will never die. But we, because of what Jesus has done, we can have forgiveness of our sin. And so it's a beautiful thing that we see fulfilled in Jesus, even like talking about these cities of refuge, that the grace of Jesus is big enough for all who call on his name. Also, part of this, as we think through the responsibility for the avenger, like, this is a family responsibility, and it makes it serious to the people. Like, you can't just go and just want revenge just willy-nilly. Like, somebody's going to have to do this, and so that's going to be a heavy burden for people to carry on that regard. Also, there's an interesting note here where the Lord talks about you can't ransom the life of a murderer. Otherwise, like, you can't pay a penalty, a fee, to say, well, my murder sin has been forgiven, because otherwise the wealthy could just murder and pay for it, and so that's not allowed. And then this reminder here that bloodshed pollutes the land, and atonement cannot be made for land on which blood has been shed. And if we remember all the way back to Genesis chapter 4, when Cain killed Abel, the Lord says to Cain, your brother's blood cries out to me. And so this kind of taking of a life, it grieves the Lord, but it pollutes the land as well. It affects the earth in a way that has a deeper spiritual reality than just that person was killed there. It brings brokenness into the land, and so it pollutes the land. And so the life is in the blood, and so throughout the Bible, the Lord wants people to value life, and so it is a constant reminder that we are sustained by the Lord, and he alone is our is our grace, but we need to value other people's life because they are also made in the image of God. All right. So one more section, and the chapter 36 is fairly short, and it is just a callback to Zelophehad's daughters, who, if you remember, their dad died. And in chapter 27 of Numbers, they said, our father has died. And if you don't give us the inheritance, then his family, because he didn't have any sons, will be eliminated from the people of Israel. And so the Lord said, yes, the daughters should be given the land as the inheritance. So 36 comes back to this because remember, they're moving into fulfilling the inheritance, fulfilling the conquest of Judah, and wanting to make sure that they have it all squared away. And the people of Gilead are remaining on the east side of the Jordan River. And so now they're thinking through like, well, what do we do if these women get married? How's that work out? Because that changes family dynamics and inheritance. So that's what 36 is about. So the family heads of the clan of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, who were from the clans of the descendants of Joseph, came and spoke before Moses and the leaders and the heads of the Israelite families. They said, when the Lord commanded my Lord to give the land as an inheritance to the Israelites by lot, he ordered you give the inheritance of our brother Zelophehad to his daughters. Now suppose they marry men from other Israelite tribes, then their inheritance will be taken from our ancestral inheritance and added to that of the tribe they marry into. And so part of the inheritance allotted to us will be taken away. When the year of Jubilee for the Israelites comes, their inheritance will be added to that of the tribe into which they marry, and their property will be taken from the tribal inheritance of our ancestors. So the concern is if the daughters of Zelophehad marry a man from a different tribe, that land is scooped up into that other tribe. And they thinking through like, now, if we walk all the way through this and just the way the year of Jubilee reads now, then all of those things will be reset on the year of Jubilee, right? And so if they, if that happens, then all of the ancestral lines get all messed up. And so they want to make it very clear. How do they move forward? How do they ensure that tribal land remains tied to the tribe, not just to individual families who may marry between tribes when the line of inheritance is only on it goes to a woman who's going to get married. So that's the situation. The law is complicated. And, even now, like we read through the law of the Old Testament, and there are things that are like, okay, yeah, sure, that makes sense. But there's always what if this from this different angle, and thinking through it all the different ways. And so like we see the people of Israel are wrestling with these things. And so what does Moses do? He goes to the Lord. And in verse 5, then the Lord's command, Moses gave this order to the Israelites. What the tribe of the descendants of Joseph is saying is right. This is what the Lord commands for Zelophehad's daughters. They may marry anyone they please as long as they marry within their father's tribal clan. No inheritance in Israel is to pass from one tribe to another, for every Israelite shall keep the tribal inheritance of their ancestors. Every daughter who inherits land in any Israelite tribe must marry someone in her father's tribal clan, so that every Israelite will possess the inheritance of their ancestors. No inheritance may pass from one tribe to another, for each Israelite tribe is to keep the land it inherits. So Zelophehad's daughters did as the Lord commanded Moses. Zelophehad's daughters, Malah, Tisra, Hoglah, Milcah, and Noah, married their cousins on their father's side. And it's probably not first cousins, it's probably a couple cousins down the line. They married within the clans of the descendants of Manasseh, son of Joseph, and their inheritance remained in their father's tribe and clan. These are the commands and regulations the Lord gave Moses to the Israelites on the plains of Moab by Jordan, across from Jericho. And so the clarification is the daughters of Zelophehad, they can marry anyone they see fit within their clan, so that they can keep the family together. And when it says they can marry anyone they see fit, usually in the a patriarchal society like this, the dad would be involved or the brothers would be involved. Right? We see that in Genesis when Abraham sends a servant to get a wife for Isaac, right? And brothers are involved, or Jacob goes and to marry Rachel and brothers are involved. And so here, these daughters are the family. There is no father and there are no brothers. And so these daughters of Zelophehad, these women, have the agency to marry anyone they see fit within their clan, to keep the ancestral lines clear. And calling back to the year of Jubilee, that's the year of Jubilee, the great reset of the land there comes when the people who sold their land for some reason that they could not afford, they were in debt, they sold the land, and at the year of Jubilee, the land was returned to the original family so that the land could stay in the family and the ancestral tribal lines and clan lines. And so that's the impetus behind the law of Jubilee. And so they're not saying, like, they want to make it very clear that it's about paying off debt and getting back out of debt. It's not about marriage between clans and tribes. The land needs to stay with the family, which is a very different thing than from our Western mind, where people are not tied to the land. Like, we buy and sell houses, people move, because America is not Canaan. America is not the promised land to the people of Israel. It's not, and we shouldn't treat it like it is. And so the people of Canaan have a different situation. The people of Israel in Canaan have a different situation than what we have in our current context. So that's Numbers. That's the book of Numbers. We did it, guys. We wrapped it up. So are there any questions for today's section or for the whole book of Numbers overall? Any thoughts, questions? I'd love to hear them. All right. Christy, were you saying, or not Christy, Carrie, were you saying something?
Oh, I was trying to make sure I unmuted myself first.
Yes.
A couple of things. When we go back to the map of the original boundaries, it looks like that their original boundaries encompass Syria also.
Yeah.
Right? So technically, they should own all of Syria right now also?
Well, modern Israel is very different from biblical Israel. I want to make that clear. The expectation that people have for the nation of Israel as it exists right now is often overlaid with Christian pictures of the end times and trying to fit the end times into a theological system that, the way the nation of Israel operates right now is not in alignment with what God was calling the nation of Israel to be back then. And so it's really complicated to just say they should have that land, because it's different. Is there a covenant promise with the people of Israel? Yes. Are they living up to that covenant promise? No, they are not. And so, like, that is one of the tension points that we have with looking at these maps and saying, so the people of Israel should own part of Syria. And there are people in Israel who are saying we should own parts of Syria. But these are also, like, people who live there. There's people who live there, like, right now. Yeah. And so should they just go and drive them out now? That is a very different conversation than when the people of Israel were going into the land at this time. So I would not say, well, Israel has no fault in the conflicts in the Middle East. The nation of Israel has no fault, and they should just have the land. It's much more complicated than that. So in our modern setting, but yeah, so the land, though, like this, where the Jordan River is, like, that is the boundary essentially for Israel, up to right about where the A is, and this in Canaan, between the N and the A. That's the Sea of Galilee would be right in there. And so like Israel never took all of this land ever. So this is the goal that the Lord gave to the people, but they never did it. Even under Solomon, when it was the biggest biggest reach of the people and the conquest, they still weren't filling out this boundary all the way. So
where's Lebanon's borders on this? If you look in this, where would Lebanon's borders fall on this?
I'm not entirely sure,
because I don't know much about the cities in Lebanon. So
yeah, well, it is to the north, I believe. So let's just
it is a northern.
this is what I'm going to do is earth.google.com. Have you guys played with Google Earth? It's super fun.
What's
it's
really
loading.
Looking at the plate boundaries, like earthquakes that are going now, that volcano that's going off, looking at the plate boundaries on the earth.
Yeah, that is cool. So let's zoom in here. Does it start to give us place names yet? No. Yeah, zooming. Here we go. All right. So, yeah. So Lebanon, fun. I love this stuff. So Lebanon is on the coast here, north of Israel. So like,
probably Lebo Hamath.
Yeah, Lebo Hamat would be in Lebanon. That little, I'm not sharing that part of the screen. Am I? Sorry. I'm gonna switch. Stop. Stop share, and then share screen to Google Earth. Share this. All right. Okay. So this little point here above the Lebanon, that would be just north of Lebo Hamat. It's kind of where we're at. So the white line there is Lebanon, and then this border around Lebanon is Syria. So their land that is, so this is Galilee here, which is by Ain on the other map. And so, yeah, it's the Sea of Galilee is really small. It's like, I think it's smaller than Lake Washington. It's really small. So but it has these big hillsides, and that's where the wind comes off the hillsides and whoops up storms real quickly. So, but this is the Jordan River down here, and so Israel right now is the coastline, and then these dotted lines here on the map are the conflict zones between Israel and Palestine, and so Jerusalem is where it drops in here in the middle there. That's where Jerusalem is, and Jerusalem is a city basically split in half between Israel and Palestine, because both claim to have that as a capital. So yeah, look, oh man, this is even better. So yeah, so that's kind of the layout that we're looking at. So all right, any other thoughts or questions on Numbers?
The other thing is blood. It says bloodshed pollutes the land.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all the wars we've had over the years, all these skirmishes, you wonder if God's up there going, they obviously did not read that line.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's the conquest that's about to happen in Joshua. That's a holy war that the Lord directs the people to do, and to wipe out and to push out all of the Canaanites from the land. But the people of Israel, like God's promise to them is peace as they walk in the covenant. And throughout the Bible, we see that the people of Israel failed to walk in the covenant. And so the peace never came. They never had enduring peace, because they were people. They failed at the covenant. And yeah, so it's heartbreaking when you think of all of the tragedy that is surrounding specifically Jerusalem. Just how many people have died in that region, because we are terrible. People are the worst, and we fight, and we don't obey the Lord. And so someday there will be no more wars. Someday. It's not today, but someday.
Got kind of a question on that too, since it said bloodshed pollutes the land, but yet God also allows them, once they cross over, they're fighting battle. I mean, he tells them to annihilate, multiple times he's told them, especially with King David, annihilate this group of people. Sometimes it did. David did. He went in there, and Saul was told to annihilate with
the Amalekites.
Amalekites, and he didn't do it. And then he kind of says, "Oh, I didn't." And Samuel's like, "No."
Right. Yeah. The people of Canaan, in the time between the patriarchs going to Egypt and the return of the people into the land, the people of Canaan were, in God's perspective, he saw what they were doing, and they were abhorrent. They were abominations. The way they lived, the sacrifices that they were making to pagan gods, all of these things. And so while I'm not like, yay, go kill people the Lord is bringing justice to the people who are already in the land for their corruption. It is part of the rationale behind the conquest. So it's not just the God saying like, they're in your way, you should move them out. It's like, no, these people are terrible. They're evil. And their evilness has come before me. And the Lord used the people of Israel to bring justice for the people of Canaan's wickedness. And it's not pretty, and it's not easy to like say like, well, that's what God did. It's heavy, but sin is terrible. Sin has consequences. And so when we wrestle with the conquest passages in Joshua, we'll come to that again. So
I think there's also a difference between the bloodshed poisons the land, but the specific instances of bloodshed that are used in those examples are examples of murder. They're not necessarily battles. They're like Cain and Abel was a murder. So it wasn't something that God directed Cain to do. It was, whereas the battles are, like Jason said, it's God bringing his justice for the redemption of sin for those people. So I think that's more what corrupts the land than, it's not necessarily bloodshed, but the intentional murder of something that was not directed by God.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So taking a life in anger is polluting the land. Taking a life on accident is also a kind of, it's polluting the land, but it doesn't mean you have to be killed for it.
Right.
And so like, that's why there's the city of refuge, the 6 cities throughout the land of Israel, and in the east side of the Jordan. So there's 3 on the east side, and there's 3 on the west side of the Jordan. Now, what I find interesting is most of the people would have been on the west side of the Jordan. And so to get to the east side of the Jordan, like you really had to commit to running away. And that was probably, the safest place to go would be to the other side of Jordan, to the east of the Jordan. But anytime in the Bible we see people moving east, it is an indicator that they are moving away from God's promise. And so when they are taken in exile, they go to the east. When they are banished from Eden, Adam and Eve go to the east. There's these things that, like, when we think of the east, you're walking away from God's promise. And yeah, just an interesting correlation. It's not something you can really preach on, but it's just interesting to note. So, I'm sure you could find a way to preach on it. I just don't know how it is yet. So I don't want to, I'm sure people have. So
if you're moving to Spokane.
well, yeah, obviously. Duh.
Hey, I was
Yeah.
born in Spokane,
But now you're here.
but I'm
In the
here.
West.
Family lives there too. So yeah.
We'll pray for them.
Yeah.
I was born in the East. I was born in Michigan, and now I'm here
Yeah.
in God's country, as west as we can get.
That's right.
Yeah, I was born in the UP. So, yeah,
Youper.
I really had nothing to do with it. It just kind of happened for me. So, but yeah, any other thoughts or questions on this passage?
It kind of still blows me away how the patriarchal society for the Zelophehad's daughters,
Uh-huh.
you know, how people, your dad and your brother get to say who you're going to marry. That's still a concept that is hard to wrap my head around.
Yeah.
I mean, my dad,
get
yeah,
that.
of course, but my brothers or something. Like, I don't have a brother. I guess nobody gets to say in this one.
Well, if you don't have a brother and your dad dies, then you determine.
As long as they're in my clan and my cousin.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the bummer, but
Sorry, not going that one.
Yeah.
yeah, it is a different culture, and it seems weird to us, but it wouldn't have seemed weird to them.
Yeah.
So that's something too. Like we tend to look back on these things and we're like, that's so different and so weird, but it's like, it's not. It's for them, it's normal. It's what they would expect. Sometimes one of the challenges in our modern reading of scripture is reading with Western eyes, and not reading through the ancient Middle Eastern eyes of scripture. And when we do that, we import a lot of meaning onto the text that isn't there, or we take out applications from the text that are not there. And so we just need to we have to check our bias when we read scripture. And so like, that's one of the reasons why I highlight, like, yeah, this is really violent, and it's weird for us. It's hard for us in our day to read that violence and be like, oh, that's no big deal. But for this culture, when they are talking about like wiping out enemies of God, it's like, this is a religious war, and these people are a problem religiously. And so it wouldn't have seemed so foreign and strange to them as it does to us. So
How does that explain? Like, if you look at the Crusades, how they were so wrong, they kind of annihilated everybody if they didn't,
yes,
fall into line. It's like,
yeah. There are some people
they really
who
think they were doing God's service.
there are people who absolutely believed that, and there are still people who think the Crusades were a really good idea. I'm not one of those people, because it was not. It just was. It was a kind of religious manipulation of the masses, and it wasn't great. And people got people died. The cities were destroyed over and over again, and so it was not a good thing. But yeah, it was. Yeah, people were the worst. So, yeah.
Kind of.
Christy, is that your dog snoring that I hear?
Yes.
What is that?
Yeah. Let me see if I can get the picture.
Bulldog?
It's hard to tell where the camera is pointing here, but that is.
Yeah, he's a big dog, and I was like, what is that noise? And it was.
Yeah, sorry. That's why I had you muted for most of it. Yeah, his name is Slim, and he is adorable. He's 53 pounds, 5.5 years, and he thinks he's a lap dog.
He's fun.
And yeah, but thankfully he slept through most of this. Earlier, I was on a Zoom call with my family for my cousin or my nephew's 15th birthday today. And Slim was attacking his teddy bear. And so all they could hear through the whole thing was him growling and breathing heavy. And It was great.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah.
When I first heard him snoring, I thought somebody on the Zoom thing had fallen asleep. I was like, seriously, guys, you fell asleep?
It's
Yeah.
happened before. So,
You clap your hands, Jason. Go, hello, wake up.
well, when everybody turns the cameras off, I don't know who's asleep. So, I mean, Sandy could be asleep. I don't know. So,
Turn it off so I can't hold my phone and my book, my Bible. At
yeah,
the same
no, it's fine. It's fine to turn off the camera. It's no big deal. I just am joking. So,
We just don't want to distract you.
I appreciate it. So, all right. Well, I can hear children moving around above me here because the youth room is opening up soon. So we should wrap up. Yeah, next week, and I'll send an email out. Next week, let's take a week off so I can get things situated for Deuteronomy. I have some resources and want to kind of get a head start on laying it out before we jump into the actual walkthrough of the book. So we won't have group next week. And then we'll come back the first Wednesday of October. So
Okay.
sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. Well, y'all have a good week and I'll talk to you later.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Guys, have a
All right, thanks.
night.
Bye.